y'all would all stand, is Chaplain Kim from High Ground Ministries here. If you would say the prayer, and if everybody would remain standing for the pledge.
Gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this evening. We thank you for this very place and all that it represents. We thank you for our city. We thank you for its progression. Lord, you are the architecture of all things, and we honor you for that. We ask, Lord, that you bless these proceedings this evening, that you give favor to all the citizens of Enterprise, and help her to grow and prosper as your hand has been when we put you first and honor you in all things. Father, I pray your presence on the gentlemen that help to rule over our city with the help of the citizens, Father, for all that they have done. And we thank you once again for the blessing that you have poured out upon us. We thank you, Lord, not only for what you have done and given, but even more for who you are, because you are peace, you are comfort, you are healing, you are so many things. And we have seen where you have even brought peace and healing to our very own city at times of trauma. And Lord, we thank you for all that you have done and given. In your precious name we pray, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chaplain Kim. Mr. Hicks, please show for the record that all councilmen are present. Gentlemen, in your packets there is the minutes from the July 19th regular session. If y'all would look over that.
So moved. Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion about the minutes, please cast your vote. 5-0, Mr. Hicks. Okay, at this time we'll have privilege of the floor. Anybody that would like to speak to the council for 3 minutes, please come up and talk to Mr. Hicks. Give your name to him. Kozlowski?
That's close.
Okay, that's close. I'm sorry. If you would like to come up, please.
Good evening, members of the council, mayor, treasurer. I just wanted to come forward. I'm a homeowner on Dolphin Street, and with the schools that's just about ready to start our sessions, and looking out for the safety of our children, the intersection at Alberta and Dolphin Street is currently a caution and a red. And with Dolphin being greatly redone, I'm noticing that there is an excessive now amount of speeding that it happens. We see it every day. I'm just worried about that intersection. There's been accidents there before, and now that even Alberta, from the, that corner to the entrance to the school, has been paved, it's a lot. There's a lot of speeding there, and I'm just proposing to have it looked at instead of having a caution and a red, to eliminate the stop sign, or eliminate the lights altogether, to make it a four-way stop. This way we don't have to do maintenance on those, lights at that point. And this also gives caution to everybody that knows they have to slow down there, instead of doing that straight cut from Main Street to the Bo Weevil Circle. That's all I ask for the council to take in consideration, and also to put it in for the safety, especially now, since it is a great street, and Alberta's been done, and I can tell you, being a homeowner there, I've already seen the speeding that is occurring there, and school's next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kozlowski. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr.
Mr.
Manning.
Chairman, my recommendation to the council would be that Chief Jones is our chief constable, to allow Chief Jones to do just an oversight of that and look at it, and give you an evaluation and come back, and hopefully give you an answer on it at that particular point.
Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Webb?
I think I'll stand over here if it's okay. so
Yes,
I
sir.
can speak for both the council and the, people assembled here. About a week and a half ago, we had a heavy rain late one afternoon, and during the night, some high winds. I live at the corner of Pinehurst and Holly Hill. I got up at 6 o'clock Friday morning to get ready to go to my office and where I serve as volunteer director of E911 for the county, and discovered I had no electricity. I quickly got dressed, went outside to see what was wrong, and I noticed a large group of people and equipment on the edge of my yard. Went over to see what happened. I had a very large oak tree which was right at the edge of the right-of-way, which fell across the power lines, cable lines, and blocked the street, and it was a very large tree. There must have been 5 or 6 vehicles, including front-end loaders, a small crane, 10 or 15 workers from Public Works. They had been there since between 4:30 and 5. It was a mess out there. These folks were working willingly and hard. They were smiling as they worked. They cut that tree into pieces that they could load onto a truck. They filled the truck up, sent that truck off. It came back, unloaded some sand, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. They filled the truck up again finally. They raked up all of the leaves which had been shaken loose. Assured me my yard looked as good when they left as it did before they came. The sand was used to fill the ruts which were made by the heavy equipment as they worked in the yard to get that big tree out. There must have been 10 to 15 people. I don't know who they were. Mr. Roberts probably knows exactly who it was. It just gives you an idea of the kind of service we receive from our city departments. This happened to be Public Works. It could have been a water department, could have been any other department. It's the kind of service that we enjoy in the city of Enterprise. And I would like Mr. Roberts to personally thank each member of that crew that were out there from about 4:30 a.m. until they had, and this is important, there's a lot of traffic in that particular area. About 7:30, they had the roads clear and traffic could flow. And then the electric company and the cable company could go to work to restore that service because it had taken electricity and cable out of a fairly large area. So I extend my thanks to the Public Works Department and to all the city departments that serve us in the same manner. And I guess what I could close with was a couple of lines from one of my favorite songs. I love those dear hearts and gentle people who live in my hometown, because those dear hearts and gentle people will never, never let you down.
Thank you. Thank you, Colonel Webb. And you are right, we do have some great employees. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, under old business, call for a public hearing now to consider ordinance 070516, providing for the rezone property owned by Christian Mission Centers, Inc. from R75A Residential District to B2 Downtown Business District located at 0 Gibson Street. At this time, we'll open the public hearing. Well, is there anyone here to speak for or against this rezone? If not, we'll go ahead and close that. Gentlemen, you've heard the ordinance. Is there, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, please take. I'd like Hilton Gallo representing Briggs and Ingram for the presentation of the FY 2015 City of Enterprise Financial Statement. Mr. Galloway, how are you?
Good, fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has everyone got a copy of the report?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What I'll do, and obviously you can tell it's 150 pages or so, I'm just gonna go through and point out the highlights, significant items that I noted going through. And if there's anything specifically you would like me to slow down and readdress or discuss in a little more detail, just stop me, ask me, and we'll try and get your questions answered. We turn to the first tab, which is the report. It's labeled report on page 2. You'll see our opinion on the financial statements about the middle of page 2. It says, in our opinion, the report of us and other auditors indicate that these financial statements were prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. There are no exceptions. There are no modifications to the report that were disclosed during the course of our audit that haven't been reflected in the financial statements, so they are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. The next section to the report is the MD&A. It's under the financial statement tab beginning on page 4. Pages 4 through 53 are actually drafted by management of the city. It gives you a financial overview of the city, of its current year, financial highlights, of financial projections, and then other information including economic forecasts, where the city rates nationally and state, and then comparative financial statements between last year and the current year. I'm not going to specifically try and address any of the various components of this section, but just to say this is where a user of the financial statement would probably spend most of his time, because it's going to give you the greatest narrative and the greatest explanation of the information that is contained in the financial statements, and then obviously the financial position of the city and the results of the city, and then again, significant events that the city foresees in the future, as well as events that have occurred. I would point out on page 4, you'll see a couple of references there to statements, the County GASB Statement 45, 65, and 68. 68 had a dramatic impact on the financial position of the city this year, and that it is the first time the city's had to report its net pension obligation, its unfunded net pension obligation. The funding of the pension plan is handled through the retirement system of Alabama, but every participant in the retirement system has either an overfunded account or an underfunded account. This is the first year that you've had to report that, and the impact that had on the city, I believe, for the city itself was about $6 million. Does that seem? Yeah, something like $6 million. I've got that number somewhere, and we'll look at that. Well, I do have it. On page 5, you'll see, and there's a lot of numbers on page 5, and I'm not going to go through all those numbers, but embedded in those numbers, you'll see the $6.4 million was the impact of implementing GASB 68, and then GASB 45, which was the other post-employment benefits, which are the health and benefits and other benefits that are provided to retirees of the city, was implemented in 2009, but that number now is about $6.9 million. So that's about almost $13 million of obligations that are now reflected on the city's financial statements that 6 years ago would not have been reflected. That's due to an accounting standard board opinion and changes, but it does have a significant impact on the financial position of the city. The next section, and where I'm going to spend most of my time, really begins on page 54. That's after the MD&A. These are the financial statements of the city. The first statement is a statement of net position. That shows all the assets and all the liabilities of the city. The net position, it actually puts the city on a for-profit basis. It also embedded in here is all the infrastructure assets of the city acquired since 2004. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because there's a lot of information, but you really have to drill really deep to get an appreciation and understanding of that. Where I want to spend my time is actually on the fund level statements, which begin on page 56. If you turn to page 55, you'll actually see all the revenues, all the expenditures, all the transfers to the city. this past year, but again, those are not at the fund level, and the fund level are really, where the greatest value of my time can be spent tonight. If you want to limit me to 3 minutes, that's fine. Okay. On page 56, you'll see the balance sheet, which reflects all the assets and all the liabilities at the fund level. This is the level at which you have discretionary control. This is where you have your budgetary control. These are the liquid assets and liquid obligations of the city. Therefore, this is where the real meat of the financial position of the city at the end of the year is going to be told. You'll see in your general fund, which again you have total discretionary control. It's not obligated in any way unless the city itself has obligated it, obligated that asset. We ended the year with $10.9 million, $6.3 million of that being in cash, $4.1 million being in receivables, which was collected within 60 to 90 days of year end. So it's very, very liquid. Again, we had $10.9 million in assets. Liabilities was only $1 million, and unearned revenue, which was your property tax assessment, which was assessed by the end of the year but not collected subsequent to year end, was $2.4 million. So we ended the year with a $7.38 million or $7.4 million ending fund balance. Of that $7.4 million, $6.7 million or nearly $6.8 million was unassigned, meaning that the board had made no decision or the council had made no predetermined allocation of that money. In other words, it was sitting here, you could do with it whatever you chose. I point that out because best practices by the GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, prescribes that you have at least 60 days of unappropriated or unassigned fund balance at the end of the year. This actually represents 102 days, so we really got a 42-day surplus above and beyond what even best practices is considered to be. That's a good thing. I think the council to be commended. It indicates that you've been real stringent and are mindful of the resources that are available to you. You haven't obviously gone into a lot of deficit spending and brought that down. As a matter of fact, that's an increase over last year of some 40 days. Last year you were at 62. Well, actually 62 days. Last year you were 60 days. I'm sorry, I got 60 and 42 down. You had 62 days of reserve last year. You got 102 days this year, so it's an increase of 40 days in reserves. The total operating budget of the general fund is about $24.2 million, and we're sitting on $6.7 million in reserves. Again, that's 102 days of operating reserves. In other words, we didn't collect a dime of revenue. We could operate for 102 days given the current budgetary level without having to draw on a line of credit or receive any other type of revenue stream. The other three funds you see there on page 56 are your capital improvement, debt service, and your other governmental. Capital improvement, obviously, that's capital improvements. It is what it says it is. Those are projects that the council has set aside to be accounted for in its capital or monies it has available to be appropriated for capital projects. Debt service, again, is used to report your debt service. On page 58, any questions on the balance sheet? Okay, on page 58, you'll see the statement of operations. That reflects all the revenues and expenditures on a modified accrual basis, meaning that all the revenues that are collectible within 60 days of year end and all expenditures that are payable within 60 days of year end have been reflected in the financial statements. Total revenues this year in the general fund, again, I'm going to focus primarily on the general fund, was $28.8 million. That's $3.3 million increase over last year. We had about $25.6 million in total revenues last year. The vast majority of that was from sales tax increase of approximately $2.7 million. Half a percent, I believe, was a new assessment. The other was just from natural growth. Total expenditures, $24.2 million. Capital outlay, and I'm going to skip all the way to the right-hand column to show you the total, because when it comes to capital outlay and total expenditures, there are some relevant numbers there that flow through the capital improvement fund that need to be pointed out. But if you'll notice under the big expenditure there, $20.4 million is the educational city school system. $16.6 million of that was the money appropriated for the acquisition of Batesfield, the old junior, College Street Elementary. Am I missing any other capital outlay that was embedded in that $16.6 million, Steve? I think that's the bulk of it. There is money set aside, obviously, for the acquisition. Well, the acquisition of the new junior high property, was that in there as well? Okay. That $16.6 million was a debt that was incurred by the city obviously, the benefactor of it, or the asset that's gonna be generated by it's gonna end up being reported by the city school system. The other capital outlay item there, you see about 4 lines up from 3/4 of the bottom of the page. $970,000 in general fund, $5.2 million in the capital improvement fund, for another total of $6.2 million. Those were capital improvements that were made to the city. I'm trying to think of what the primary, can you remember what the primary front? Road, well, the streets,
Roads.
Additional outlay for, the fire department,
Farmers market, it was about 3/4 of a million, yeah.
Farmers market was some of it.
Okay. But the bottom line is, we reinvested, or you invested about $6.2 million back into the city, in addition to the acquisition of the properties from the school board that now will become property of the city again. Down at the bottom, you'll see the new debt. There's 2 new debt issues there. One, in the debt service fund, $20 million. That was just a refinancing of the 2009 existing debt. We had an economic benefit there of about $1 million, meaning the net present value of the future cash flows to service this debt is going to be a little more than $1 million less than the debt that you retired. So we actually had an economic benefit there. The $17.8 million that you see in the capital projects fund, that's the money that in turn was used to acquire those properties back from the school board. So that's the only new debt that we had this past year. End of the year with net change in fund balance, your general fund improved by $2.4 million. Your capital projects fund actually declined by $1.7 million, but it is designed to float up and down depending on what your capital project demands and requirements are. So no big issue there with it declining. If you had no capital project plans, it would actually decline down to 0, but that's not the case at this point. And then debt service, again, fluctuates with the debt service requirement, and it transfers over from the general fund to retire our debt, or any debt that comes due. On page 61, you'll see the water and sewer. That, again, we'll look at the balance sheet first, and then we'll see the statement of operations. Total current assets, I'm on page 61. For the water and sewer was $3.7 million. That's about an $800,000 increase over last year. Total non-current assets, which are your depreciable and non-depreciable fixed assets, are up about $3.1 million, from $40 million to $43 million, for a total increase in total assets of $3.9 million. Our liabilities had a total increase of $5.3 million, again, which was primarily due to a debt issue of $4.3 million, which was incurred for the sewer. It's a major sewer project? Oh, the meters. The meters? Okay. So we incurred about $4 million for the primary purpose of replacing approximately $4 million of meters. On the statement of operations, on page 62, that shows you the revenue and the expenditures. The only item I would point out there is depreciation of $1.7 million. I'm pointing out here because I'm going to turn over to page 63 and talk about it a little more. If you turn over to page 63, you'll actually see the net results of the year. This is the difference between the revenue that was generated and expenses incurred. We had a deficit of $274,000. If you add back the depreciation and amortization that I just pointed out of $1,735,000, and then subtract out the principal portion of our debt of $1 million, we actually had an improved position of about $900,000, which is not a big swing. You just don't want to see a systemic decline in revenues over expenditures, because obviously the cost of replacing water and sewer systems is pretty expensive, and if you don't start to accumulate and have profits systematically throughout the period to cover those costs when they occur, then the only alternative you got is to either transfer money from the general operations or to borrow. So again, in trying to make a case for or against whether or not your rates are proper, obviously it's easy to defend where your rates are, because we're actually operating at a loss. Would also justify a rate increase, and I'm not trying to make policy here, but when you're having that conversation, this is where you want to go to see.
Yes.
Just to interject here, as you recall, we were looking at some issues with water as far as updating that particular area, and I'm glad that the accountant is bringing it up to your attention, but the primary reason we postponed that was the
That's no problem. I will tell you what I have seen in some of my more aggressive and well-managed systems. I don't know what the City of Enterprise policy is. I don't know if we have a policy really. They have a systematic increase every year in their water and sewer rates. They either tie it to an index, an inflationary index, or they just come up with an arbitrary 1%, 1% is the highest I've ever seen, rate every year. And what that does is just systematically build into the system a revenue stream to cover the cost, as well as create reserves to help replace pumping stations or add sewer systems or whatever the
We have an
unanticipated
index,
may be.
but it's not sufficient enough to cover the water rate or the water issues that we have at this particular point in time. We have a plan in place. If you'll remember, we had joint meetings with both the water board and the council during work sessions. We were ready to go to the public with that, but simply because sequester, we postponed that at a particular point.
Any questions on the numbers? The rest of the report is kind of narrative in nature, so, okay. The next section of the report are the notes to the financial statement. If you'll turn to page 83, again, just kind of point out the highlights to me. I like to look at how much I'm investing in our community, how much our investments are, and what those investments are. Investments are extremely liquid, extremely conservative, so I'm not going to go into that. But if you look on page 83, you'll see our capital investments. Construction in progress this past year, it's about the middle of the page, $4.6 million. This is at the governmental level. This is not including the water and sewer. We had $4.6 million of construction in progress. Put $2.9 million, a little bit further down the page, of assets in service, of which $1.4 million was construction in progress from last year. So the total amount that we've invested, and I made this point earlier, is about $6.1 million in the community. These are permanent fixtures that will service our community for years to come. They're not reoccurring one-time costs or reoccurring costs. They're actual investments in the community, and that's a strong number. I like to trace that number. I like to see what a community is doing to invest in its own infrastructure. Again, last year we had about $6.1 million. $4 million was primarily in streets, $1 million in equipment, and then roughly a little less than $1 million in the farmers market. On page 84, you'll see the same type schedule for our water and sewer. We had about $4.7 million invested in the water and sewer system, so you combine that with the $6.1 million. All told, last year we had nearly $11 million invested in the community in infrastructure, which again will continue to service this community for a long period of time. $3.4 million of that was actually the meter project, and then sundry other costs, equipment, etc. Turn to page 87. This is the debt schedule. Again, I've already mentioned we basically had three debt issues last year. One, you'll notice up near the top, the $20 million in the addition column. The $20 million 2014 school bond issue simply retired the 2009 school board issue, and as I stated, we made about $1 million on that transaction due to the reduction in interest rates. The 2014 capital improvement fund or capital improvement bond issue of $17.8 million was used primarily to acquire the properties that we discussed earlier from the school board. Down at the bottom of that schedule, you'll see other post-employment benefits, $6.4 million. That's the number that would not have previously appeared in your debt service and would not have been in these financial statements, but GASB 68, which was implemented this year, which was a real pain, but we got through it, generated $6.4 million of obligations that are now reported. And then, I'm sorry, that's your other post-employment benefits of $6.4 million. That's your obligation to your retirees, existing and future retirees. And then your net pension obligation was $5.4 million. So the total of those two is about $11 million of obligations we have in the future and currently to our retirees. On page 88, you'll see the debt activity for the water and sewer. I mentioned earlier we had a $4.2 million issue in water and sewer, which is used primarily for the project to replace all the meters. And again, they also had the net pension obligation reported of approximately $1 million, and the other post-employment benefits of $500,000.
If I may interrupt here, Mr. Chairman, out of that 4.2 million, those meters, the old meters were not reading the gallons correctly, so there's enough revenue coming in to pay that bond issue back.
That was
Almost
one
saved
of
it.
the deals on, with the company
It's
that,
guaranteed.
Correct.
yeah. So they would make enough to pay the bond off.
Correct. I'm sorry.
It's a win-win.
Yes.
It is a win-win.
I wanna point out one, if you turn to page 103, and this always interests me to look at this. Again, the 5 million, down at the bottom, the third column, you'll see net pension obligation, the 5.6 million, that's a number we've discussed previously, but if you turn over to page 104, the very next page, that is based upon a rate of return by the Retirement System of Alabama of 8%. In other words, they've gone back 20 years and they have projected their rate of return on their investments, and the actuary has determined that they had an 8% rate of return. In today's world, 8% rate of return is strong, to say the least, because all your fixed instruments are so low, your government guaranteed bonds and debt and that sort of thing. If their yield is only 7%, the column right next to it, instead of the city having a $5.6 million obligation, it's got an $8.9 million obligation. And what could happen theoretically is, you've made these obligations to the retirees. If the fund itself doesn't generate sufficient revenues and income and an income stream to pay out those retirees, in theory, that obligation can come back to the city. I get real antsy as an auditor when I see these high yields that have been used to extrapolate what these obligations are going to be. But that is really, and if it goes up 1%, it drops down to 2.8.
But what you need to be aware of, it's not just our city, it's every city.
Everybody.
That participates in the RSA. Would
Yeah,
that be?
Those are universally applied.
Yes, sir.
Same thing applies on your net other post-employment obligations you see on page 7 down at the bottom. That's what those obligations are. But if you'll notice, the actuary that is calculating and extrapolating those is using much lower rates of return than inflation. So I don't know who's going to be right there, but it is kind of interesting to see how that swings. The last part of the financial statement or the audit report is our opinion on the report on internal controls and compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. That begins on page 133. We found no deficiency or no non-compliance with laws, rules, regulations. Did not have a single audit this year because we didn't have sufficient level of federal funding, so you don't have the compliance issues or our opinion on compliance with laws, rules, and regulations dealing with your federal grant. But in essence, there are no recommendations as a result of the audit in terms of internal control changes or enhancements. And then the last section is just required communications. There's a lot of additional information there for the council, but I'm really not going to go into any of that. If there's anything there that I thought was really relevant and should be brought to your attention, I would do that. Audit went real well, other than being held up for GASB 68, which was beyond all our controls. And the work that encompassed, the audit went well.
Gentlemen, is there any questions for Mr. Galloway? Thank you, Mr. Galloway.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate
So to
your time.
summarize, good audit.
Good on. There you go.
Under new, I'm
We
sorry.
need to go and accept the audit.
Y'all have heard the presentation by Mr. Galloway. Is there any questions for Mr. Galloway first? If there's not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the audit.
So moved.
I have a motion, second?
Second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, please cast your vote. Thank you. Under new business, introduce and call for consideration of the appointment of the following as election officials for the municipal election to be held August 23rd, 2016, as provided by Section 114627 Code of Alabama 1975. Authorization is requested to compensate the officials at the same rate pay for county and state officials at $150 per day for the inspector and $125 per day for the clerk, with lunch provided by the city. Further authorization is requested to authorize payment in the amount of $1,575 to Election Systems and Softwares for poll worker training on Thursday, August 18th, 2016 at the Enterprise Farmers Market. I'm gonna read the names that are prospective. Chief Inspector, Charles Webb. Chief Clerk, Gloria Webb. Returning Officer, Calvin Garth. Registration Clerk, Deborah Council. Tally Official, Bruce Keel. Provisional Ballot Clerk, Susan Carmichael. Absentee Inspector, Neil Brown. Absentee Clerks, Ann Bridget, Annie Hooks, Harold Skelton, Donna Skelton. For District 1, election officials, Fanny Rogers, Nettie Garth, Dorothy Richardson, the alternate for District 1, Nancy Smith. District 2, Kate Hobbs, Pernell Fleming, Annie Roberts. The alternative for District 2, Doug Bradley. The next page, District 3, Wendell Sanders, Ruth Ann Sanders. Bertha Block, alternate for District 3, Charles Block. District 4, Karen Love, Dan Presley, Pat Presley, alternate for District 4, Diane Nowicki. District 5, Patricia Campbell, Carol Johnson, Jackie Hawkins, alternate for District 5, Joanne Stone. Alternates at large, Boots Love, Margie Simmons, Helen Nichols, and Jan Parker. Are there any questions about the election officials or thereof? If there's not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, please cast your votes and ballots. Okay, under introduce in a request from Vishram Foods Inc., DBA Piggly Wiggly 215 for a retail beer off-premises only license located at 1002 Geneva Highway, and call for a public hearing to be held at the regular meeting scheduled for August 16th, 2016, prior to consideration of the request. Introduce a call for consideration of accounts payable for July 2016 in the amount of $528,281.89 as follows. City of Enterprise, $430,339.48. Waterworks Board, $97,942.41. Y'all have heard the accounts payable. Is there any questions? If not, I'll entertain the motion.
Make a motion we pay accounts payable.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, please cast your vote. Review and consider contract billing as follows. Number 1, Poly Engineering Inc., invoice number 16384 in the amount of $11,491.86 for contract design services for the new fire station number 4. Number 2, the Spyglass Group LLC, invoice number 10626 in the amount of $421.93 for contract services, consulting fees for cost recovery services. Total contract billing is $11,913.79. Is there any questions about contract billing? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to pay the contract billing.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, please cast your vote. 5-0, Mr. Hicks. Under travel requests, there's one, the police department, the Detective Thomas Aranus, I'm not sure. Sorry about that. Harris. Child Death Investigation Training Seminar, August 22nd through the 23rd, 2016, Birmingham, Alabama. Estimated cost, $533. Is there no questions about travel requests? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. If there's no discussion, please cast your vote. And that is all. 5-0, Mr. Hicks. That moves us to the mayor's report. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give you an update on our Parks and Recreation. Our registration for youth football and cheerleading now until August the 12th. Enterprise Junior Dixie Boys team to play in the World Series in Pineville, Louisiana, starting August the 5th. Youth golf registration for clinic and league now until September the 2nd. Tournaments hosted: Dixie Youth Sub-State,
July the 7th through the 9th, we had 12 teams there. Dixie Youth State Baseball, July the 15th through the 21st, we had 32 teams. 3 National Softball Association Girls Softball Tournament, July 30th, with 23 teams. Scheduled tournaments for August would be August the 6th, the National Softball Association for Girls Softball. August the 13th, Ultimate Sports Promotion Baseball. And August the 27th, United States Specialty Sports Association Girls Softball. In our engineering department, permits approved, single-family detached, 7 at an estimated cost of $1,078,000. Single-family attached, 5 at an estimated cost of $314,000. Residential additions, 10 at an estimated cost of $125,958. And commercial additions, 5 for an estimated cost of $147,500. And 1 new commercial for $955,080. Nuisance properties, investigated properties were 42. Verbal contacts were 12. Notifications mailed out were 28. And properties mitigated were 27. And process 7. In Magistrate's Office, 1. Dilapidated houses, as of yesterday, Monday, August the 1st, we have had 5 dilapidated houses that have been demoed, and we are on task to getting 18 down during the first phase of the demolition. In our fire department, a pre-bid meeting for the Central Fire Station will be held on Tuesday, August the 9th at 10 a.m. at Plaza Drive on site. Bid openings for the Central Fire Station will be held on Tuesday, August the 16th, 2 p.m. at City Hall in the Mayor's Office Conference Room. Police Department, please be reminded, ladies and gentlemen, that school will begin this Thursday. Please follow all posted speed limits. I'd ask the media to please help us get this word out, to follow all the speed limits and just take precaution toward our children going back to school, and also those parents that are getting those children back to school, because they're trying to get into a routine as well. Public Works, our street department repaired sinkholes and washouts in different locations citywide. Yard debris pickup has returned to normal because of the issues that we had with the weather here a while back. It has gotten back on a normal track. Camellia Commons, the sanitary sewer there, L&K Contracting has been awarded the bid. Contract documents are being executed, and pre-construction conference will be held in the next 2 weeks. NRCS grant on Aaron Drive, file survey is complete. Also, a pre-design meeting was held with NRCS, and the proper review and final design is in process. Dolphin Street, a groundbreaking is scheduled for tomorrow, Wednesday, August the 3rd at 8:30 at the corner of Alberta and Dolphin. Also, Brooks Circle, we will be scheduling a meeting with those property owners over the next few weeks to give them a schedule. We'll actually treat those residents just like we did on Dolphin. We'll have a proposed work schedule based on weather permitting. Also, Bates Memorial Stadium, a pre-bid meeting is scheduled for August the 9th, 10 a.m. on Plaza Drive at the new location of the Central Fire Station. Bid openings for Bates Memorial Stadium will be held on Tuesday, August the 18th at 2 p.m. in the Mayor's Conference Room at City Hall. Water Department, in the month of July, we see our system continue to grow. We added 24 new service meters this past month, and also the Railroad Street well on number 3 is about 40% complete currently. We have scheduled Movie Under Moonlight this Friday night for those parents that would like to bring out their children, grandparents that would like to bring out their grandchildren. It'll be a great event. We'll have also bouncy houses as well as some water slides for the children. It's going to be hot, so we want to make sure that it's a good family night out and affordable for families that are on budget. Also, gates will begin to open at 5:30. Movies will actually begin at dusk. And the rain date is scheduled for Saturday, August the 20th, at the same time and same location if rain occurs. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cooper?
We would like to thank everyone for coming, and I noticed that we have a member of the Boy Scouts. We're gonna ask him if he would stand and, be recognized.
Thank you for coming. Councilman Johnson?
Thank everyone for coming tonight.
Councilman Dawson?
Mayor, where are we gonna park on Dolphin Street? You got parking on Dolphin Street for that ribbon cutting?
Faithful is.
Okay, he said Alberta and Dolphin, so it's really at the intersection of.
We're gonna do it at the intersection of Albert and Dolphin,
Sure. There at the church.
will be at the church, and we'll probably do the ribbon cutting right there in front of the church at the intersection.
I knew the parking was the problem.
Yes, sir. The pastor gave us permission to park the church.
Okay. I'd like to thank Boy Scouts for coming out, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight.
Councilman Miller?
I'd like to thank everybody for being here.
If there's nothing else, we will be adjourned
Mr. Chairman,
until-
if I may.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Webb, let me thank you for coming out tonight and taking your time to recognize our employees. I too appreciate what they do every day, but it means a lot when a citizen comes out and recognizes our department heads and our employees for what they do every day. So thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
And thank you to our department heads for working on a diligent and steady pace every day to try to keep our citizens satisfied and give them the services. Thank you.
If there's nothing